It's the 24th of November, 2013, and BP Night was released. You may have heard of this level, and this is one of the earliest known hardest demons. This was an attempt at being the hardest demon in the game. It did get rated, however this level was hard for the time. Very hard. Like unrealistically hard for the time. This level had these ship gaps. This basically being straight fly, and for the time with everyone on their 2013 phones on 60Hz or maybe even less, this was out of the question. The level also has some pretty hard ball timings for the time. But the straight fly to me is what makes this so difficult for its time. Of course this was ridiculous and no one could do it. And as it turns out, neither could the verifier. Of course you have to beat your own level to verify it's possible, to be allowed to even upload it on the servers. So what's going on here? Did Raw7 really beat this level? Well, kind of. You see, Raw7, the creator, actually added a secret path into this level, which if taken would skip the majority of it. And this is what I consider to be the first major example of an impossible level, so to speak. It's not really impossible, but no human can really do it, at this point at least. Now while this is the most early impossible level example I could find, this style of level would only evolve, of course. Impossible levels would get a step up in difficulty when Sono924 came to town. So this Korean player made a level called the Hell Zone, and this puts BP Night to shame. I mean, just look at these gaps. Most players now can't do things like this on PC, and this level is a good example of why I love impossible levels. I mean, just imagine for a second that you're a player back when this level dropped. Your hardest was probably like Demon Park if you were good, and you just see this. You followed up days later with a sequel called The Hell World, with more absurd gameplay. I mean, just look at the ship choke point, 65%. Still, obviously no one could do this, and the levels were made much more popular due to influential player Sari, and so they were under much more scrutiny. Once the third in the series, The Hell Dignity, was released, people were very suspicious. But wait, here's another one, The Hell Origin, which isn't the first one, which is kinda confusing. So did Sono924 really upload these levels legitimately? Well, of course not. See, this level was released during the 1.4 update, but as you'll notice, this level doesn't actually contain any 1.3 or 1.4 features. Why? Well, Sono924 basically played a 1.2 version of the game, in which RobTop hadn't yet patched a glitch where you could basically verify levels, just from completing them in practice mode. So with this discovery came these levels being unrated and Sono924 resigning. Meanwhile, it turns out that Sono924 wasn't the only one that liked making absurdly difficult geometry dash levels, as a new demon would come out called Heaven and Hell, and if you thought that the Hell series was hard, take a look at this. This was a new gameplay concept pioneered by creator Roadboss, known as an orb spam section. In this case with only 2 block white spaces, making it barely possible. It was found to have a secret way, much like BP Night, destroying its demon status. At this point in the game, while most players weren't exactly huge fans of these levels, they had effectively established themselves as their own subgenre, and they would mostly be in the spotlight when they were given an official rate by RobTop. And this was due to lower awareness of hacking and also lower care. Because at this point the hardest levels weren't of quite as much concern, here's another impossible level creator who had one of his hardest rated demons, Majako. The level, infamous now, being Unnerved Stereo Demoness. This puts all prior entries to shame again. As you can see, he has a particular style. Another infamous level of his creation was Future Demoness, which would be released later. You might notice I refer to this Stereo Demoness with the unnerved prefix. Well, this is due to the fact that Majako heavily nerfed the level to make it remotely playable for the time, and so the old version is referred to as unnerved, and this will become a very important distinction going forward. On April Fool's Day of 2014, the first level in the now infamous Silent series, Silent Club, would be released by Black P2S Full. Silent Club. This level was very popular, perhaps due to its strong start with this orb spam, meaning anyone trying this would immediately see that they were not going to make it very far. Orb spam was of course this level's main thing, which is what we saw in Heaven and Hell. The other stuff was hard as well, but the orb spam is pretty much what carries the majority of the difficulty in this level. There were more levels like this that seemed impossible for people back then, popping up and becoming very popular, such as Red World, a collab of Sari, a famous player back then, and the Neptune, a famous creator. This level would become well known for its high difficulty, and especially for this novel concept, which while it wasn't the first to do it, it certainly did popularize it. The Swing Copter, a dual ball with one of them having gravity changes affecting the other, making this new sort of game mode. And this mode was kind of impossible for players back then. Not even just this, there's also a really hard ship for the time. And of course, because this is Sari, an impossible ending. Remember Silent Club? Well, you probably know of another impossible level with a similar name. This level was not only much harder than Silent Club, but due to famous player and creator Zobros doing a practice run on it, it would gain extreme popularity. This is Silent Clubstep by Salient, a heavily nerfed version of which is now a top 10 demon. The bulk of this difficulty in the level lies in the 3 big choke points, the first of which being the 12% ship, which you'll see here with hitboxes is kind of a ball buster. This is actually the worst part of the level and makes playing from zero very boring and very tedious. Then we have some pretty tough ship gameplay before we enter this cube ball duel, in which you must do many inputs in which you have only one frame to click otherwise you die. This is known as a frame perfect. And in the original unnerfed version of this level, there were 60, 144, and even 360 FPS frame perfects dotted around the level. In the case of the 360, you have only 0.002 seconds in which you can successfully do the timing. This final choke point, however, takes the cake in terms of frame perfect insanity, as in this section, which has been dubbed the 8 jumps of hell, you have to complete 6 144 FPS frame perfects in a row, with the last 2 being a bit easier. And to make it worse, you then have to complete this maze section at the very end, which I'm pretty sure is made pretty nerve-wracking by everything before. This level was really popular and sparked a lot of interest in impossible levels in the community. And there were some other levels made, like this one here, Silent Clubstar, made by the same guy, which is essentially Silent Clubstep on steroids. And there was this level made by a guy named CYCLOLCYC called Crimson World, which is also kind of insane. And the very famous Death Corridor would be released, which even inspired many remakes, one of them being the hardest level ever beaten at the time, Death Corridor Z. This level, much like Crimson World, utilized the wave game mode to an extreme degree. As you can see here, you have to go into these tiny gaps at 3 times speed. Another level that would be famous for this was Open Circles by Nick24. Already, these first sections are akin to Death Corridor. However, it's what happens next that's crazy. This is a wave spam section, which requires you to click absurdly fast and with absurd precision. I mean, it might as well be impossible in 60 FPS. It doesn't even end there, as then you have to weave in between these blocks here, requiring high CPS and precision, being the second hardest part of the level. It would be on the 14th of September of 2015. Things would be taken to the next level when Silent Circles by CYCLOLCYC and Salient was released. You may recognize these names from previous levels, such as Crimson World and Silent Clubstep. You may have thought the previously mentioned entries were absolutely insane, but this would undoubtedly take things to the next level. As the name implies, this level is built on the 9 circles trend. The beginning doesn't seem so different to what we've already seen, but it is once you enter the fabled drop section that this level takes a significant step up. I think you can already see that this is really hard just from looking at it. Much like Crimson World, Death Corridor, and Open Circles, it has a particular focus on wave gameplay. You can see here you must squeeze into these gaps. And then we have a spam section with MINUwave, much like Open Circles. But wait, what's this? When you first see this, you might be confused. How is this possible? Why are there blue orbs? And that is fair, as you probably find it hard to even comprehend spamming fast enough to fit between these gaps, let alone the presence of the blue orbs. I think this is where we can say that these levels have left the realm of human possibility. This level was hugely popular, mainly due to the ridiculousness of this final section. In fact, a video showing this level off, uploaded by Tosh Deluxe, went extremely viral at this time, with it now having over 3 million views. The way that he managed to show this level was through utilizing invisible pads and blocks, which was made possible to do in the recently released 2.0 update. As you can see here, this is how he showed the ending, with this spam so fast that the wave appears to be facing at a 180-degree angle, and you can't even see the wave trail. Of course, this is not even remotely humanly possible, with the spam being completely impossible, let alone consistently for over 20 seconds. So this level is clearly on a whole other level, but if you were paying attention from the start, you may notice something strange about this level. It seems like the wave is in dual mode? How is this possible, you may think? Typically, duals operate in a way where one input will control both icons, so this really shouldn't be possible. You see, in the 1.6 update in which duals were introduced, there were 2 options for how they could be controlled. The standard default setting in which one input would affect both icons, or with each input, in this case the spacebar and the up arrow, each control their own icon. Of course, the intention was for 2 people to play the game in a sort of co-op way. However, some players had other ideas. This completely multiplies the difficulty of these wave sections by many times. Not only do you have to perform frame-perfect inputs, but you must also, in the case of opposite gravity duals, alternate your clicks between the 2 inputs perfectly, or if they are the same gravity, you must do the exact same inputs at the same exact time, with both inputs. Even without this factor, this is completely infeasible. But once you introduce a 2-player duel, it becomes completely absurd. This puts the spam section back into perspective as well. Not only do you have to do this incomprehensibly precise and fast spam, but you also have to, at the exact same time, perfectly alternate your clicks. Safe to say this isn't being done by a human anytime soon. This level exploded the popularity of impossible levels into their all-time peak. Channels like Tosh Deluxe would showcase many more absurd impossible levels to millions of views. Other levels that acclaimed popularity at this time were Slaughterhouse by Iced Cave, which as you can see here has some more extreme wave. And this in of itself was highly influential in the community, with its tireless onslaught of frame-perfect gaps, and of course the spam. Of course, as this became an increasingly big trend, more people rushed to profit and it would begin to oversaturate. Impossible levels would soon become synonymous with the low effort clickbait slop made for quick views. Due to this, impossible levels would enter a dark age of sorts. There would still be impossible levels made, however people weren't quite as interested in them as they used to be. Every now and again there would be excitement around a new impossible level, such as with Exasperation in 2017, but for the most part the hype would die down quite a bit. The limits would begin to be pushed yet again when a group of players would create the impossible levels list, and it would grow quite popular with many people contributing levels, and even going for world records. In 2020 especially, Many new, interesting, and creative impossible levels would begin to gain prevalence, and enjoy a wave of popularity with some new channels popping up around this time. Not that there were some exciting new developments in technology, such as easy access to a wide variety of hacks with the Mega Hack, and with some primitive botting tools. A botting tool is essentially something that allows you to record inputs in many runs, typically in practice mode, and then replace them nearly perfectly from zero. Silent Circles will be eventually updated in difficulty by a level known as MINUSCLUB by Xvoluminous. This is of course a level that uses Clubstep as its song. It is a gauntlet of frame-perfect timings, 2-player gameplay and straight flight. This level made a very important innovation known as the MINUSwave. This is essentially a wave section which you must go through frame-perfect gaps with 2 players at the same time, and simultaneously perfectly adjust to these gravity portals. Oftentimes this causes very high CPS also. This was also a blueprint going forward, and many other people would take this even further. MINUSCLUB only included this as but a small part of the level. It would be when MaxFS released Arcturus, this would kick into the next level. This level includes MINUSwaves, a core feature, and this would greatly increase the difficulty with it being much shorter. See, if there's an effective innovation like this, it can be hundreds of times harder than everything else, and so therefore, you don't even need to match the length. The next impossible level to take it a step up will be one of my personal favourites, Singularity by Septagon. This level, along with having a great atmosphere, has an interesting gimmick. It gets progressively harder until you reach 66%, and it goes crazy with a 4x speed 2-player dual wave, essentially turning into the tightest MINUSwave yet, like something we saw in Silent Circles, which there's now a more efficient method to it. You may have wondered why people didn't just put like 100 gravity portals in each corridor to make it like 100 plus CPS and increase the difficulty, but there are some important rules you should know for the impossible levels list. There is a CPS limit of 16, along with a maximum of 3 clicks per frame. This was done to avoid people from just putting low effort spam to inflate the difficulty of their levels. But there is another list, called the silent levels list, which has a much higher CPS rate, limit of 45 and 5 in a frame, with the level having to be harder than number 10 on the ILL, in which you see things like this. Similarly, there is another list known as the physically possible levels list, which goes even further. As long as the level is physically possible, meaning possible within the physics of the game to go from beginning to the end, it is allowed. And this causes levels like this to be made, in which glitches are exploited, such as the exposition limit glitch. In levels like Nessus, in which you must click 537,603,333,333 times per second for a number with over 10,000 digits seconds long. There are other levels like this, such as PPLL Life, in which there are massive trigger mechanisms involved in making the numbers this big. Of course, you can't truly bot these levels, which, while the ones on ILL you can, it is highly time consuming and difficult using a mixtures of frame stepper, hitboxes, trajectory tools, and other hacks. Seriously, I have personal experience with levels on the low end of the modern ILL, and it is excruciating. So seriously, huge credit and thanks to the people whose footage I'm using in this video, such as Fipan, NVI, PyGuy, Mentrolum, Yaboy Mega, Melting Ice, Zenith888, Locked101, and Skeleton Lol, Scarlet, Lunchmeat, Crimson. There's also the theoretically possible level list, which goes into what isn't even physically possible, such as not obeying time or the laws of nature. However, I would like to go back to the ILL for the purposes of this video, in which we can see that some levels on this list were actually nerfed versions of things that broke the rules of the ILL, such as the spam limits, with levels like Kingdom of Miracalis actually taking the top spot. This level was completely against the rules, but it was nerfed to obey them, and it ended up being number 1. Anyway, MINUSCLUB, as we talked about before, kind of set the pace for the other extreme levels to be created, such as Wistfully by Nana USA and Veletheris, which would of course utilize the MINUSwave to a high degree, with 2-minute length, including many tight ship sections, along with the return of the maze, as seen as MINUSCLUB. This would be dethroned by Mute Evasion, also by Nana USA, which had a focus on maximizing CPS, oftentimes to the likes of Straightfly. And remember Wistfully? This is Ballistic Wistfully. At over 3 minutes long, it has quite a host of diabolical gameplay, and it pushes everything to a new limit, with very long MINUSwave sections, and something known as an ATOS duel, named after a prevalent name in the community who is also involved in this level. This essentially entails a 2-player duel, with the one at the top being usually a ship in a 1-block space with frame-perfect gameplay, and the bottom having whatever game mode doing some kind of frame-perfect thing itself. And it stands to reason that this placed high for so long. This MINUSCLUB style of level became much more popular, and these levels now had teams of people, with them requiring FPS of sometimes the tens of thousands. Shafts 2, made by 10 people, including ATOS being an example, utilizing 3069 FPS to even be possible. However, it would be an ATOS project called Formosa that will bring it to a new extreme, requiring 20,000 FPS. This level wasn't even that long, being a little over 2 minutes long, but it has a crazy high CPS, 20,000 FPS frame perfects, and this beginning is infamous, as it utilizes something called a swift click. Here there's an invisible, multi-activate dash roll following the player, requiring you to click and release on the same exact frame, known as a swift click. This level kind of bounced around the top 10 a lot, as people weren't sure exactly how it plays, However, this will be blown out of the water by a massive project involving 13 people, it being over 6 minutes long. CYCLOLCYC. This is basically just Ballistic Wistfully on steroids. It has MINUSwaves, crazy 2-player duels, thousands of FPS or frame perfects all over the place, mazes, and even literal click counters, in which you must click an exact amount of times to pass barriers, and it is very long. This is a colossal project, and I would recommend watching Nay's analysis of it, as they go into much more depth. It would take a long time for this level to be dethroned, and it would be done by kinda a remake of Mute Evasion, but with more interesting decoration and gimmicks, called Tax Evasion, by a team of 6 people, with things such as this glitch where the 2-player duels are unsynchronized, leading to this iconic MINUSwave section. This level is very cool, and it's one of my favorites in the modern ILL. At this point, it would take a long time for any of these levels to be upstaged, like almost 2 years long, but it would be eventually done by Crimson, someone whose videos I used to watch, with Open Window. While I'm not exactly an expert on this topic, I can guess that the reason this is considered a lot harder than the rest of that stuff is due to its gimmicks, and also a lot of Dombo buffing, which is a highly controversial practice otherwise known as macro buffing, in which you buff a level around a certain macro, which makes it not only much harder, but an absolute nightmare to bot for anyone on the outside. This, along with many claiming it to be lazy, are reasons for it being so controversial. This level is under 1 minute long, yet due to its highly efficient usage of gimmicks, click counters, and frame perfect spam, it is the hardest that the ILL has to offer today. So that is the evolution of the impossible levels in Geometry Dash, mostly focused on the ILL, from 2013 to 2025 in the modern day. I could have made this video in a lot more detail. I did leave out some things for brevity. It's entirely possible that I later go into more detail into one level or one era later on. Just before I end the video, I would like to thank many sources I used to help research, such as Stormfly. The Geometry Dash wiki was very helpful. The ILL was extremely helpful. I also used footage from many channels, such as Shotgun99GD, Zobros, Tosh Deluxe, and of course the previously mentioned showcasers, Mentrulum, Pyguy, NVI, Fipan, Yaboy Mega, Skeleton Lol, Lunch Meat, Scarlet, and Melting Ice. They really helped with the making of this video, but that is all.